Hello again, Interblops. I'm here once again with a little Omake to put a cherry on top of my Dark Souls 2 series. Over the course of the LP, I had several conversations about its lore with the very distinguished gentleman who bought me the game, Mr. Justin Carpenter. I reproduce these conversations here, edited lightly to excise tangents and such, but very nearly verbatim. I should note for the record that neither of us has a direct line to From Software or anything like that, so much of this is conjecture, doing our best to interpret the scattered backstory fragments that Souls storytelling is so fond of. I found it interesting and enjoyable to think about, though, and I hope you'll enjoy it too. Our first such conversation, which according to my timestamp on the log took place back in July of 2015, began with a discussion of Majula, and he said, "The presence of the shattered Lord Vessel there, and the pit, which remind me greatly of Framps. The doors to the throne room remind me greatly of the ones below Firelink, and I wonder if the King's seal was made from the old Lord Vessel, which also leads me to some interesting theories as to what Vendrick took from the Giants." To this I said, "Oh yeah, you mentioned before that you were curious as to what my take on the kinship was, to which I regretfully answered that I hadn't the foggiest. In appearance, it seems to have been their sacred purple donut." And he smiled and said, "My guess is that the King's ring is made from the Lord Vessel, and is a soul hibachi like the vessel was. What he took from the Giants was the soul of their greatest leader / Allfather. See, take a Lord's soul into yourself and it warps you, its will overpowers yours. See the 4 famous souls of the Nameless Ones. The hibachi ring was meant to allow him to remain Vendrick, and trickle a huge power source into himself at a metered controllable rate. The point of the Throne of Want being giant-sized, recut for a smaller king, was to say that Vendrick was a giant. To his people, to his enemies." And I put in, and literally for that matter, when you encounter him in-game, he's not the size of a giant, but quite a bit taller than any normal human. And he went on, "To take the power of the greatest of giants and own it without drowning himself in the greater will of the much more powerful soul and being warped by it. Nashandra wanted Vendrick to last on the throne without becoming too great for her to control. Did you ever wonder why Nashandra didn't make a direct bid for the throne? Link the fire and you burn. She wanted to be firekeeper of the first flame, but not its fuel source. The experimentation with giants and giant souls, the attempt to rebuild dragons, attempts to create renewable great soul resources to harvest and farm. With Vendrick the suffering adapter on the throne, burning, and her with a renewable fuel source to keep the pilot light going. This brings home another huge thing, and why I don't feel that the 'there must be another way' ending to Scholar of the First Sin was the best one. You build that crown, you become immune to hollowing, but only you. You now have the power to grant an eternal age of fire to everyone else. No hollowing because the fire doesn't go out. You just have to resign yourself to sitting in the kiln and burning forever." But that's the theme of Dark Souls, over and over and over. What is living? What is dying? What is eternity? You would allegedly not hollow, seated on the throne of want, crowned, but your existence would be functionally hollow. And I said to that, "Makes sense. I do still think the seeking a third way ending is a hopeful one, and would be wonderful if it worked out, but there's no certainty in it." And he continued, "Would you do that to spare humanity hollowing? What would happen to you, lost to your own thoughts for eons at a time? Would you go insane? Would you forget why you were there? Dark Souls 2 is all about remembering your mission. The crown itself, would you want immortality once you had it? When a person like our map fetishist has forgotten everything, is he still alive anymore? This is the message I see again and again in Dark Souls 2, and why I find it philosophically an even stronger game than Dark Souls. All the giant golems seem to be attempts to strip the will from a great soul, while retaining its stored charge in battery form. The attempt to recreate dragons, an attempt again to create a renewable Lord Soul resource. This is also the theme in Bloodborne, isn't it? Attempts to cheat a world with dwindling resources / consequences to zero-sum game attempts to cheat nature. Running theme in all 3 games, a sense of you can't play card tricks with the universe, resources are finite, and energy of any kind is a zero-sum game. At this point I inquired, Forgive me if I'm belaboring the topic, but would you feel up to elaborating at all on why you feel the "don't take the throne" ending is the lesser one? Is it because you reckon it's a doomed effort? Or too much of a risk when there may be more of a certain solution to the curse available, if one involving a horrible personal sacrifice? And his answer: I am, personally, hugely on the lawful side of the alignment chart, as you surely know. To me, it's very simple. You're a hero. Sacrifice yourself in an even more meaningful way than the first game, burn forever, unending and without extinguishing, without expending. The needs of the very, very many outweigh the needs of the one. But I note, the game raises interesting questions there, which raise doubts about that plan too. Your memory is everything. You won't completely hollow, no, but you may forget, and Dark Souls 2 drives home, hard, that forgetting is essentially going hollow. You forget why you're wearing that crown, take it off, and worse, there's no guarantee that the fire will sustain, only that you won't go completely hollow. You may end up too weak to sustain it yourself. The dark sign returns, just the fire doesn't wink out completely. And your mind's technically intact, if so brittle from isolation that you couldn't go out and be a hero again. And my reply? That's true. We don't really know why Gwyn couldn't keep the fire going, after all. It may not have anything to do with his going hollow or hollow-ish. One person may simply not be able to provide fuel forever, whether in full possession of their humanity or not. And he continued, I challenge only the perception, found on many Dark Souls 2 sites by a vocal group, that third way is the only honorable choice. What exactly the crown does we're not sure, just that it prevents a person from completely hollowing. Hiding the king's ring away from himself is significant too. Hiding the ring away from himself? Did I forget a thing? And he double-checked that and corrected himself, hiding the ring away from Nishandra, and hiding his soul away from himself, I meant. At this time, this wasn't really a thing I had considered, so I said, oh ho! I didn't think about there being significance to it not being on his body. And Justin elaborated, he separated the fuel he'd absorbed from the Lord's soul in a place you can only reach if you're human, so Nishandra never could, and guarded the king's ring, forgive me, with the very last of his life. Which brings up an interesting question. That soul had to have been separated from him voluntarily, with preparations made in advance, carefully, in secret from Nishandra. He deliberately hollowed himself to create the impression the pile of fuel he'd amassed had been depleted naturally. I had to laugh a little at this. Good Sir Velstadt, kindly bell my head in. No, really, I command this. Yes, I'm certain. And back to Justin, I'm guessing Nishandra had no idea that his ring was the key to opening the throne room. Next part of our conversation, in August of 2015, we'd discussed how he had to have fully intended to hollow himself, isolating his soul away from his body, requiring forethought and assistance. The king's ring, meanwhile, is the key to the kiln, to access the Throne of Want. This is significant. The shattered Lord Vessel, too. The Lord Vessel was the original key to the kiln, see Dark Souls 1. The Lord Vessel was shattered to make the ring, but the ring isn't known to be the Lord Vessel's successor key object. But there's more. Vendrick was unable to sit on the Throne of Want, you may recall. Knew himself unworthy. I'm going to make a guess here. He knew himself unworthy because the kiln wouldn't open for him, meaning that the vast collection of souls he'd acquired weren't nearly enough. But he knew the ring was the key object, and its wearer, the new Lord Vessel. He separated his soul from himself to protect the largest pile of souls he knew existed. He entombed himself in a place that only an unhallowed human being could enter, thus barring Nishandra from entry, and guarded the ring as a hollow. The entire purpose of his hollow existence was to keep Nishandra from gaining access to the new Lord Vessel. And regarding his guarding the ring, I said, not very effectively since you can just walk in and take it, but one assumes his response to Nishandra trying to waltz in like that would be very different, to say nothing of Velstadt's additional presence. He said Nishandra couldn't enter, remember the lock, if I recall correctly, requires you to be unhallowed. And I said, oh, I mean the ring, not his soul. Being that it's Vendrick's soul that you need to be human and unhallowed to be able to access in the Shrine of Amana. And to this he said, the beauty here being that Nishandra had an incorrect idea about how it worked. She thought a bright enough soul would unlock it, didn't know it needed a key. so she had no idea one needed that ring or that it was valuable at all, and he's the last person she'd ever seek out. He's useless to her. He thought it was purely about soul brightness and power, hence why he had the largest cache of souls he knew about, his own, in a place where she couldn't reach them. He hoped that the lack of that pile of money, as it were, meant that the remaining money in the world would be insufficient. All of this tying back into the Dark Souls 2 main theme of do not forget what you're here to achieve. Nashandra got lost in beefing up a patsy to unlock the throne, and didn't really understand how the throne and its lock worked. And regarding not forgetting what you're here to achieve, I put in, which is a fairly easy thing to do, since you spend a lot of time in a number of areas between major revelations. Collecting the 4 great souls, knowing you're supposed to go looking for the king. People tell you to do these things, you go do them, and info nuggets on how this is supposed to relate to you undoing your curse are few and far between. And back to Justin, this is the entire point of Dark Souls 2. What is your mission? Why are you doing the things you do? Do you, Salad, even remember why you came to Drang Lake? It wasn't to bear or seek Celeste. You had a goal. You've almost forgotten it. You came to cure the curse. And of course, in this expanded game, you can indeed cure it for yourself. You can accomplish your mission, but what would it mean to do so? This is, by the way, why I think Dark Souls 2's maps aren't terrible. They're deliberately disorienting. And I said I don't think they're terrible either, and the fact that they don't always connect logically, the one most frequently cited is Earthen Peak to Iron Keep, which is a pretty weird transition, it doesn't bother me over much. I think what annoys detractors most is that the levels are more linear within themselves, which is true. They aren't as twisty and layered as Dark Souls 1's or Demon Souls. I can live with this though, and it means I don't get as lost. And to that he smiled and went on, so enjoying this journey, and pretty much convinced of what it was that Vendrick stole as his war prize. And I said I'm glad, and you did make a pretty damn strong case for that. And he went on, the last giant himself, yeah, their king. Remember, giants are plant-based, in reference to the way they turn into trees when they die. I can only presume all the harvested giant souls powering various things, and giant-like golems were cuttings from him. And on that I said, that may want some revision. Some of the expanded lore in Scholar, and a big pile of dead giants in Aldia's Keep, suggests that multiple giants were taken captive and experimented on. The fact that the ancient dragon, if you can defeat it, drops a giant soul, suggests it was also created from one. So yeah, it looks like some of the Giant Lord's subjects were used for additional doings. Basic premise stands though. And back to him? Oh indeed. They had captured the waves of rescue parties sent to fetch him, but it's also possible that they basically harvested his acorns and did horrible things to them too. Really gives you an idea of how horrible a bastard Vendrick under Nashandra was. And my thoughts on that? I like the depth this gives to Vendrick too. He committed some serious atrocities, invading the giant's country under false pretenses, which granted he didn't know were false, captured and enslaved its king and an unknown number of subjects, experimented on them with Aldi's assistance, and yet he has a lot of seriously heroic qualities as well. He pushed back when he got a sense of the bigger picture. His plans to counter Nashandra, locking Aldia up in his mansion when his mad scientist shenanigans went too far, though of course, as Scholar reveals, locking up Aldia didn't exactly take. And in his memories accessed through the Ashen Mist Heart, damn does he have a lot of uncertainties and regrets. A very multifaceted guy. And he said, yes, this again is why Dark Souls rocks. Deep, interesting characters. He cannot be dismissed easily, and yes, his final massive self-sacrifice to guard the key to the kiln away from Nashandra was heroic, majorly. The fact that you can clearly see it had to be extensively planned in advance makes it even more so. He knew exactly what he was about to do. And then in October of 2015, we picked up the thread again. So, Vendrick unmistakably prepared his end to spite Nashandra. That, I think, I've argued to the point of, it's hard to make a case against it. There's another factor stacking with it too. Vendrick planned his death such that his hollow body could not be found by Nashandra. She would need it, after all, to prove the king was dead, and to argue that he could no longer rule as king. To succeed him, proof of the end of his reign was needed, and without a body the king was missing, but not confirmed dead/hollow/otherwise gone. Nashandra didn't fully know where exactly he was, only generally. She knew that the Shrine of Amana was an obstacle between herself and him. She knew the shrine was full of little singing munchkins who soothe beings of dark into a docile torpor. She was pretty sure that's exactly where he must be, since they were her own bane. She kidnapped the One to try to worm out of her how to get past them, to experiment and see if she could find a way to resist their song, but also to bait a hero into rescuing her, hoping that the grateful freed creature might give the hero information that she wouldn't give Nashandra. She kidnapped the One to try to worm out of her how to get past them, to experiment and see if she could find a way to resist their song, but also to bait a hero into rescuing her, hoping that the grateful freed creature might give the hero information that she wouldn't give Nashandra. The embedded serves as something of a test. Is the hero that would free the captive singer willing to do what it takes to achieve his or her goals? Would you kill an unarmed person whose story you don't know to achieve a story goal? Nashandra wants the kind of hero who craves victory above troubling moral dilemmas. They're the easiest to manipulate and steer. Just tell them the progress lies that way. And you're that person. The whole story, you've largely forgotten about your goal in coming to Drang Lake, reversing the curse. You've been on others' errands, because others told you to do them. You've never come one step closer, as far as you know, to reversing your curse. Nashandra wants exactly this sort of hero to fulfill her goals. The theme of losing sight of your goals and forgetting why you're here runs so deep in Dark Souls 2. Every NPC is a case study in this. The story of the blacksmith and his daughter really stuck with me. He's physically hollow, but his mind is sharp. She is physically human, but has forgotten her own father. Or possibly he only remembers a daughter, and is projecting this onto her. You're never sure. Pate and Creighton, a couple of right bastards, all eager to get you embroiled in their war with one another, both of whom gladly punk you in the end without a second thought. But Aldia, his rage at humanity being denied their birthright. I believe the first sin wasn't Gwyn taking a Lord Soul for himself. It was linking the first flame to humanity collectively. Let me explain. Humanity's natural state, as we discussed, is seen in the first game's intro. Humanity was hollow. Empty, unintelligent wretches, animal-like, simple, acting without contemplation. Gwyn, in finding the Lord Soul, became a lord, thinking, contemplating, planning. He acquired want. This is massive. Humanity equals want, so echoed the ancient dragon. Gwyn's humanity, burning, alive humanity, rather than static, cold humanity as existed before his first sin, was characterized by self-awareness, thus awareness of what one lacked, want. It inspired the great kingdoms, the great kings, the great achievements, because humanity acquired awareness of fire, change, cause and effect, potential, and through that acquired the desire to do and not be undone, to have and not lose, to be and not end. The curse of being actually alive, being a flame, is to desire to burn. Aldia, meanwhile, envied humanity before this act. He resents Gwyn for making this choice for him, for giving him a taste of fire, of burning brightly, of doing and being and wanting and taking, in exchange for a temporary life with actual death at its end, in which one wants and never is truly happy. Name a single being of power in the Dark Souls universe who was ever aflame and truly happy. Even Solaire, who was happy only in his quixotic hope to one day be a flame, to find his son. And I weighed in at this point. At the same time, one wonders, I do anyway, whether things would actually be any better in the dark. That's the question at the heart of the series now, isn't it? Aldia resents knowing fire. Knowing and never being able to own it. Fire burns and consumes. The richest soul is but a large fuel source. Fuel is finite. You might compare Aldia to Adam, the mythic first man, the one who lived in limited but contented innocence, dark, because he could not imagine what he lacked. You might imagine an aging, weary Adam thinking, I would trade all of this world I made with my first sin for blessed ignorance and simplicity again. But you can't go back to innocence. You can't unlearn the taste of self-authored actions. Ming does, but doesn't think about doing. Doesn't think about, is this the right thing to do? Ming, by the way, is his cat. She's a sweetie. Aldia resents that fire was a costly gift with many catches and caveats. He resents that it's fickle, fleeting, mercurial. It doesn't stay with you. That to take advantage of it, you spend it, and it's gone once you spend it. And what you buy may not be what you thought you were buying. Looking at you, Vendrick, with your generations-long war. And your fair queen. And I said, fascinating stuff, and a depth at which I have to wonder how much of it the devs intended. No matter, really, it's worth exploring either way, but it makes me curious as to whether they thought as far into this all. And back to Justin, I have trouble believing that a narrative this coherent wasn't at least partly intentional, but again, I'm a big believer in the art speaks for itself, no matter what the authors intended. In November of last year, we once again found ourselves on the subject, and I started off this time. I'm getting around the point in my run where we really find the plot, so to speak, and the revelations start dropping in relatively rapid succession, so I'll likely do some more talking about that stuff as it pops up, throwing in speculation as appropriate. I was thinking about some of said revelations the other day and realized I don't have a good answer for something. Vendrick hiding away his ring is easily enough explained, but why his soul? The king's soul was clearly separated from him, and hid behind a door one could only open while human, in an area where creatures of dark are suppressed by the Bilfinito. Somewhere very well protected against Nashandra, in other words. Too much so for coincidence. Why he'd want to make sure she couldn't reach that, though, I'm not sure. Well, actually, we had gone over a bit of this in our first conversation that I went over here, but, well, slipped my mind at the time. At any rate, he answered, because it was an immense chunk of soul, great enough to sit upon the throne of want. He was a candidate king, after all, but refused. And I said, simple enough, thank you. Back to Mr. Carpenter. In his day, he was the chosen undead, who'd amassed the soul pile capable of extending the flame. Remember, Nashandra didn't value him at all, even tells you there's no need for two kings. If his soul was with him, her mission would simply have been to charm a champion into killing him and sitting on the throne. He'd collected the four well-endowed, after all. By separating his soul from himself, he made killing him pointless. It wouldn't get you the soul pile you'd need to burn long and bright. And more, if Nashandra did find him, she'd think his power was depleted and she had to start all over again. In doing that, Vendrick stymied Nashandra. He himself is useless without his soul to her. And his soul isn't squandered, it's sequestered, away where she could never reach it. She's meant to think he burned out, that his stored-up power was wasted away and is now scattered and gone. Moreover, I suspect that killing him released also the four well-endowed souls. And Velstad's job wasn't just to hide his liege's soul, but to make possible the scattering of the great souls again. At which point, Nashandra's work was much, much harder. The throne is the embodiment of want, and want is the essence of human existence in the Age of Fire. Want is the craving for that which we lack. Buddhists call it dukkha. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Suffering. Pain and suffering are not the same in Buddhism. My hand hurts. I want for cessation of pain. I suffer because I'm aware of a non-pain state that I'm not in, and long for it, and my mind tries to reject the pain state. Aldia's anger, if you seek to sit upon the throne, be you choosing fire or dark for the next cycle, is that you're fucking useless. You fought this hard just to choose the next song on a very familiar two-song jukebox. You become the embodiment of want the way Vendrick did as monarch. People want your power. They will be drawn to you, intent upon usurping you, because you have it. Aldia is now eternal, and you, by taking the throne, just made yourself temporary. Why should he care which matchstick burns away this round? He thought you were different. He thought you, like Vendrick, realized that this was fucking pointless. A little later on in that same month, Mr. C started another conversation on the subject with, "How are you? I enjoyed the new I Played a Thing and had a thought about Benart's presence in the memory." Because this would have been around the time that I was going into the Giants' memories and was kind of baffled by Benart of Jugo showing up there. This also explains why the Benart RL tells you he'd never depart with the sword, but the Benart from the future, traveled back in the memory, no longer needs it. You've completed your journey already by that time, and Benart of the future knows this. Knows you're the monarch, the greatest soul, the person who, if anyone could, would wake the Blue Moon Greatsword. I also had some observations to make about the giant purple donut. And said I, "Do tell. You've gone into it pretty deeply before. New thoughts?" And to that he answered, "Kinship is kind of a mistranslation. From what I can tell, the original Japanese word kyoshin translates quite differently. Kyo meaning capital, as in not just capital city, but the focus of rulership. The throne in essence, shin meaning core, the essential centermost part of something, the heart if you will, the essence of rulership of the giants. With this understanding of the word, the entire story of Vendrick snaps into new focus, and this also drives home what the prize was. It was indeed the throne, made even clearer by the smaller human-sized carved seat in its giant-sized bay. But the throne isn't what grants the power of rule. The kiln of the first flame into which it's installed does. The throne is merely a vehicle of access to the first flame set into it. This drives home further the tragedy of Vendrick. He took the throne by military force, by strike mission, without ever fucking understanding what rulership was. It's not the crown or the throne. It's being recognized by your subjects as great, as rightfully above them. The smallest shard of Manus, of want. And here we hit some prime Dark Souls 2 philosophical real estate. Humanity, says Dark Souls 2, is want. The ancient Showbiz Pizza animatronic dragon told us so. Humanity is that which is frail and weak and temporary, craving permanence, brightness, eternity. He let us taste that which we could only temporarily possess, never own for ourselves forever. Created want, awareness of a thing we once felt, and might feel again, but never feel evermore. Brings us back to Manus and his locket. That locket is surely linked to something from the past, ancient, lost. If he's been trying for centuries to get it back, surely anyone associated with it is long gone now. Manus wants. He wants something that's gone, that was impermanent, and he's chasing after a memory of it, leading us into Dark Souls 2, where memories are the only things we can, in theory, keep of the past, and loss of them is the true hollowing. Vendrick had it all. He was a beloved king. He had a great kingdom. But he felt time, age, and entropy. He feared them. He knew nothing he created would last forever. And I added, to say nothing of the spreading dark sign, which he himself was affected by given his hollowing. Desperation is a hell of a drug. And back to Justin, indeed. Whether or not he was hollow before his descent into the crypt, I don't know, but he sought hollowing in his attempt to cut off Deshandra. And I put in, I'm almost positive he wasn't. You'll see next episode when I go into his memories. And Mr. JC went on, I now see the golems in a new light. The golems, they are fairly unmistakably giants with their souls removed, turned into undead automatons that work eternally, unhollowing since they're empty to begin with. This was Vendrick's attempt at immortality, creating a wondrous thing that would last forever. Aldia's? Fuck my little brother and his puny wind-up giant toys. I'm going to create a dragon. Both attempts at immortality through creating something that would live on forever. And I chimed in hereabouts, and that in addition to whatever the hell it was Aldia did to himself. I suspect he may in fact be immortal now. When you kill him as an end boss, it doesn't seem to bother him in the slightest. The cost, however, we can only guess at. What is he anymore? And when you kill him, he not only fails to drop a boss soul, but drops no currency/XP type souls whatsoever, the only enemy that gives you 0. Whatever he's become, whether or not it's worth it, he is completely, literally soulless. And back to Justin, indeed, Vendrick stole the physical throne, but not the right to sit on it. The giant's resonance or kinship, that is, legitimate claim to the throne as slayer of the king and thus champion, was necessary and was what Vendrick lacked himself. Vendrick mistook thrones and crowns for holding the power of rule, when they're really just symbols of the Kyoshin, the essential core of rulership, that is a right to rule, recognition as ruler. Now, Aldia. Aldia hates Gwyn for giving humanity a taste of what it could never possess. And catching up, I noted, regarding the kinship being needed to unlock the throne, seems that way. You can't do anything at all in that room after defeating the Watcher and Defender. Nashandra doesn't show up for the big battle until then, one might reasonably deduce, because it's impossible to activate the golems and open the kiln without it. And Justin said, you aren't worthy, because without it, you aren't really the rightful monarch for that throne. Let me offer an alternate translation of the Japanese text for the kinship. There's a version floating around online, but it's, I'd say, very close but imperfect. It reads, there is a throne for each king. What he sees when he sits on it is only for his eyes, or perhaps the throne shows him only what he wants to see. Close to the English, but a little different. Power creates privilege. One can be as blind to reality as one wishes to be when one's will is unopposed. Vendrick didn't see his own flourishing kingdom. He saw want, because want was all Nashandra could feel. I almost pity her. She was absolutely consumed by emptiness, by want, by acute awareness of her own tragic impermanence and lacking. She blinded Vendrick to what he had, made him only feel what he lacked, what every human lacks: permanence, true immortality. Ironically, he and other humans clearly achieve forms of it. Strayed of Olafis's name is unforgotten. And I said, which is impressive considering the also super accomplished Logan's is not. Although we do find out in Dark Souls 3 that Logan is remembered. 2 and 3 kinda contradict each other in a few places. Anyway, back to Justin. And older names, even though the names are forgotten, accomplishments remain unforgotten. Miracles, weapons, armor, stories. Being forgotten is inevitable. We are temporary beings. Aldia would have been wise to make peace with that. Vendrick would have been wise to accept the limits of even his reach. Side note, by killing the Giant King, you made it impossible for Vendrick to do so, and thus secure the throne for himself. What you gained from killing him was yours, not Vendrick's. And I said to that, that is not a consequence I'd considered. Back to Justin, and again, it's not just a question of the physical throne. This is a man who stole and ate giant souls. He thought this would make him worthy, able, more than a mere man. But eating a giant soul doesn't make you a giant, any more than being fashioned into dragon form makes one a dragon. I'd also like to make another point. You were there the day Drummond lost the fort. Where was Vendrick? When the king of the damned giants showed up to personally slice him up some munchkins, where was our king? Our tall, powerful king with the gigantic fucking sword. The military king whose history shows a tendency for taking things by force. My reply, a damn good question. I don't know that it's possible to work out the exact timeline, but I wonder if that might not be concurrent with him bailing for the crypt. To which Justin said, in which case he's a goddamn giant coward. His people were dying and he ran. Never took the true throne indeed. You stood down the Giant King, chosen undead. You took him down. Twice even. You ended the war. This made you king. Not a crown, not a chair. And I said, in fairness, his time may have been limited with no one to whom he could entrust the safeguarding of his ring, but that doesn't change the importance and directness of the player's role. And he said he had time to ask Velstadt to kill him for God's sake and to hide his soul away. He could simply have given Velstadt the ring and said, Nashandra must never find this. You ended the war with the giants. You brought peace to Drang Lake, if bloody, miserable Pyrrhic peace. Okay, accidentally largely, but still, you did. And I said, perhaps. I suppose I'm looking for other possibilities, as cowardly doesn't read right to me. Vendrick was no saint, to be sure, but he'd faced down giants before, and the very act of surrendering his soul and giving up on his own life took some considerable stones. Running from a battle doesn't seem his style, whereas I could see him deciding there were things he had to see to personally. And Justin said, I think at that point he was poisoned deeply by Nishandra, and his actions, while not blind panic, were at least corrupted by fear. Entirely possible. That whole countenance growing darker by the day line of Drummond's. I think, though, that he was in the end afraid. Afraid to face how many of his subjects died for this fool war he started. Afraid that he could never command the survivors' allegiance and respect. Regarding the countenance growing darker by the day, I put in, that was in the Giant Lord's soul description, but I get your drift. That's right, Drummond spoke of misguided barbarism and his lord being transformed. I agree Vendrick was thinking desperately of final preparations and of walling off Nishandra, but I think too that he erred toward preserving his own security and basically left his people for dead to the Giants, and he's responsible for that. Says I, fair enough. The precise details of 2, even more so than other Souls games, have a lot of hard-to-pin downs. And back to him, Vendrick went to the land of the Giants himself, according to item descriptions. Didn't send an army, went personally, surely with accompaniment. He pillaged there himself, and pillage does appear in Drummond's description of it. Right, I said, that was a big part of why I thought it would be strange for him to be acting out of cowardice when they came knocking in return. And said Justin, I find it very, very fishy that a man who hauled ass across the sea to wave a sword around on foreign turf hid away while his own seawall fell. That difference is kind of shocking. A man who'd start trouble personally, not showing up to give the invaders hell, especially when their own king shows up personally? That's a major eyebrow raiser, and why I err toward he chickened out at the end. And for myself, it's a fair call. It still doesn't feel quite right to me, which is why I err toward, oh damn it, I got shit to do. But there are a lot of unknowns. What effects Nishandra's company might be having on him, the progression of his undeath, and so on. And back to him, I agree, he had shit to do. I just think that refusing to meet an invading king in battle when your men are being slaughtered is the sort of thing people really judge a king for posthumously. And yes, I emphatically think Nishandra's influence on him was heavy, and had weakened his resolve a lot. It wasn't simple, but even if cowardice wasn't the rationale he gave himself at the time, I see it as a cowardly move for a monarch to make in that situation. To which I answered, oh hell yes, whatever his actual motivation might have been, I wholeheartedly agree that it would have prompted a colossal what the fuck from pretty much everyone not named Velstad or Nishandra. Okay, we're on the same page then. Vendrick is interesting precisely because he's a flawed king, in my humble opinion. These choices, as poor as they were, are choices I can understand making, even if I see them as cowardly and shameful ones. I also offer the following to turn over. Why was the key to the kiln's lock what it was? I now wonder if he meant for the Giant King, whom, as far as he knew was still alive, to be able to open it and take back the throne. And for my part, oh, agreed. I suppose I may be biased in favor of the notion that his last acts were in service of doing as much to unfuck his earlier bad choices as possible. Even knowing that he'd be giving up his own life, humanity, and the regard of history in doing so. I like the idea of him making an incredibly difficult, painful, but good call in the end. And said he, I agree with you on that. I think his final decisions were an attempt at atonement and amends. This said, a braver man would have asked for a word with the Giant King and said, I've been horrible. I surrender. Leave my people be. They didn't support this war. The throne will be returned to you. I cannot give you back the many lives I've taken, but I can give you my own. May whatever you do to me bring your people some peace. And my thought on that was, fair that. The Giants seem so alien, I wonder if such a thing would have had any purchase at all, but it could have been tried. And said he, they felt rage, hurt. Surely they're capable of therefore feeling relief. They fought for revenge, so there was clearly a desire for appeasement to which to appeal. I then inquired, I wonder what your take is on Aldia's position regarding Gwyn and Ages of Fire. As interesting, brilliant, and insightful a guy as he is, I can't say as I'm with him on that one. Gwyn was certainly a dick in many ways, and Aldia's characterization of humans' fleeting form and the world we know it being a lie isn't wrong, and the desire for permanence we can't have, as far as we know, he seems supportive toward your desire to keep looking should you choose the second ending, is a hell of a downside, true. But as I see it, the fact remains that humanity's true form, the path of nature he thinks we should never have resisted, completely sucks. And to this he smiled and said, "Ah, here we touch onto the point at which Christianity and Buddhism both converge. The Buddhists call it dukkha. Once again, I hope I'm pronouncing that vaguely correctly. Literally suffering. Pain and suffering are not the same thing. Pain's a feeling. Suffering is one response to it. Suffering is the awareness that a state called not in pain exists, and an attempt to disbelieve the in-pain feelings. It's an attempt to disbelieve reality away and live in a preferable imaginary alternative. This is also the root of the Christian idea of original sin, that we ask God to author our own experiences and to judge them ourselves. The catch being that, since we existed in happiness before without any sense of ownership of it, we only gained suffering in the ability to freely pursue it at any cost. We gained awareness of, I was happier yesterday than I am today, of lacking, of want. To Aldia, I would say, yes indeed, what Gwyn did opened up a gigantic can of suffering for humankind, the desire to possess the unpossessable. But here we are, man. What would you do about it now? He sought another way, but in doing that, he failed to see the easiest, simplest road in front of him. That being, to accept impermanence, make peace with it, be temporary, shine while you can, accept that it will end, enjoy it with gratitude, not resentment. As Leonard Cohen said, "And even though it all went wrong, I stand before the Lord of Song, with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah." And I added to that, and I would add to that, yes, before the first flame, in humanity's natural state, we did not suffer, we did not want. It did not hurt us that we had nothing, and yet nothing is truly what we had. No joy, no wonder, no creation, no will, no thought. Whether these things are worth the misery that accompanies them, well, this is something upon which people might disagree. They're most certainly real, though. That something was not intended, and that something cannot be preserved indefinitely, does not make it illusory. He smiled at that and said, "Your last sentence right there. The joy is real. The brilliance, the light, they are real. Temporary, but real." If impermanent things are beautiful lies, then Aldia, you yourself are a lie, so stop believing your own words. The big game is zero-sum, but the moment has victories in it. That is what we gain through Gwyn. The ability to experience victory, again and again and again. Impermanent, but real victory. The next in our series of conversations on Dark Souls 2 lore took place in early December of 2015, and the man says to me, "Enjoyed the new I played a thing, and man, it's so obvious that the separation of Vendrick's soul happened after his descent to the crypt, and deliberately." And I says to the man, "Afterward? I actually hadn't come to that." And he answered, "The moment in his memory takes place there. He's clearly his full self. There's also a rather telling detail in the description of his soul, that Nashandra wanted his soul for its power, not him. He was never necessary for her vision, just a collector of soul power, just a bottle for the juice she wanted. Moreover, it hints at something Nashandra didn't know. In other descriptions, Vendrick is said to have slain the four well-endowed on his road to becoming king. In still others, it's said that Nashandra came to him when he was already king. I'm going to posit from this, and from Nashandra's fixation on Vendrick's soul, that she doesn't understand that the four ineffables are already scattered to the winds, that Vendrick's soul no longer possesses them. She thinks Vendrick still holds all the power to unlocking the Throne of Want. Now, ready to get a little time travel wonky with me? And for my part, so many wrinkles to this, so many maybes and probably buts. It's awesome and such a unique means of storytelling, but man, it's daunting. I can try to keep up. And he continued, "Vendrick chose you as his successor consciously. Let me lay out the thread. You killed the Giant King, and you did it purely for Drang Lake as far as anyone knows. You asked for no glory, no reward, no payment for it. Drummond knew, Veliger knew. Don't you think, since Vendrick was still in touch with Drummond by then, giving updated orders, that Vendrick knew? The giant soul's scaling mechanism for Vendrick's husk is partly to ensure that you can't access Vendrick's memories until you've slain the Giant King. When you meet Vendrick, he knows you're the one who did what he couldn't. He also knows that the throne will eat you alive, and that's what he couldn't take. Knowledge of what taking the true throne would do to him. And I offered a little clarification. On that front, I'm afraid, at least in gameplay terms, if I recall correctly, it's possible to go into Vendrick's memories anytime you have the Ashen Mist Heart. You don't have to kill his hollowed form or beat the Giant Lord first. And, says he, that makes sense from the DLC standpoint, though one could then argue that he knew he had a successor as someone downed that Giant King. Whether or not he knew with certainty that it was you, or simply put two and two together, knowing that a hero was going around, did his job for him and took no credit, and now here you are, past Velstadt. Nonetheless, by the time of Vendrick's memory, he knows you've killed the Giant King, at least that someone fitting your description did. And back to me, that is an interesting detail. He sure takes the appearance of some random in his sanctum, past Velstadt on top of everything else, in stride. Doesn't seem a bit surprised. And back to Mr. Carpenter. And he creates a lock that only you could open on the throne. Think about that part. Then he punks himself to throw Nashandra into distraction, set her on the trail, before you appear in the present of chasing a red herring, her prize, his great soul. His actions make it look to her as if his great soul is the key. He worked so hard to protect it from her. The king's ring, meanwhile, which is actually a necessary item, is left with his body as if it's just a trinket. He chose you as his successor, and then he reveals the even bigger mindfuck. He knows about the crown and what it can do. He sets you on its trail, and if I recall correctly, he's the one who forges it for you, isn't he himself? Think about it. He knew how to solve the problem, and to keep the crown from falling into Nashandra's hands, he punked himself. The theme of kings corrupted by their queens is huge in Dark Souls 2. He resisted further corruption by self-sacrifice. And regarding the crowns and such, I explained, the way that bit works is that if you collect his own crown and all 3 DLC crowns, he enchants the 4 of them so that all 4, in addition to their other properties, grant the hollow prevention effect. Wearing any of them will do from that point. And Justin chuckled a bit at this and said he could do that, and he didn't. Not for himself, but for you, because he chose you for the job. That is what Nashandra wanted. That knowledge, how to live forever and never hollow, never fade. She thought the secret lay in his soul. Because, being a fragment of Manus, she knows want intimately. Great soul energy is yang food for the yin of humanity. And I wondered, you reckon that was of interest to her? Wasn't something I'd imagine she had to worry about herself, though I'm sure it would be a good source of leverage over anyone with the undead bug. And he answered, I don't know that she needed it, but I know that she wanted it. She presses him to bring back giant souls as a food source, to eat them himself, become sweet-smelling, as Shalquar might say. She talks about acquiring a taste for rottenness, but she also praises your scent with every great soul you acquire. She clearly isn't talking about hollowing sometimes. But yes, I think what Nashandra wanted most of all was eternal, unchanging, unfading power. And I think she mistakenly thought Vendrick's soul was special. I think Vendrick knew it wasn't. And I think Vendrick's big revelation was in realizing that he could become the immortal man, unfading, unhollowing, but Vendrick the man wasn't worthy of that. Think now of the quest he demands of you, what it entails. Besting the 4 sisters. He's asking you to be his chosen and worthy successor, to do what he couldn't, be impervious to the influence of the fragments of Manus, clean them up as appropriate. I said, not really needed in Alsana's case, but he probably wasn't entirely up on what was going on in Alea and Lois. And back to Mr. C, the cleanup there was in putting the kingdom's grief to rest. The fragments aren't all evil, they're beings, and one indeed learned love, and shame for her original motivations. That's so damned heartening, it's practically the biggest world-rocking event of the game. As for Nashandra wanting the true crown, of course she did. She is nothing but want inside. Want to be safe, secure, eternal, powerful above all power. She's the anthropomorphization of humanity and its want. She is that which lacks and desires to be complete, but is never complete. She wanted forever, always, everything. You said that you worried that my read on Vendrick missed out on his heroism. I think this read utterly vindicates him. He had the power to enchant the crown. Whether he needed those other three to do it, I can't say. I err toward he didn't, but even if he did, he could have quested for them himself. He chose not to, because he realized that he wasn't worthy, and being his flawed self forever, with his conscience forever, felt like hell. The lock requiring the giant's kinship to open tells me that he meant for specifically you to open it. And his soul was really an afterthought designed to keep Nishandra's eyes and ambitions in the wrong place. This is fucking amazing stuff, isn't it? And to that I said, something there's really no data for, but that I find interesting from a what-if perspective is, what would have come of it if Nadalia had come in time to hook up with the Iron King? He seems to have been quite the dick, but perhaps she would have been a good influence on him. Don't know what her intact personality would have been like. Perhaps they would have been good influences on each other. Perhaps he would have gotten his full ass killed anyway, or rejected her, leading to the whole renouncing body and going a bit crazy thing anyway. Or perhaps they would have both been complete shits together, and reigned tyranny over the region such as the land had never seen, and it's a damn good thing their ships passed in the night. Sorry, got behind on the current thread while I was typing, but yes, it certainly is, in response to it being fucking amazing stuff. And spake Justin, I think the Iron King liked what he couldn't have, and suspect he would have been unfaithful to her, and this would have gotten ugly quickly. Nadalia strikes me as the sort who would have done exactly what her memory shards do, acquired a lovesick champion to whom she'd never truly belong, and use him to defend her against her rivals. I laughed a little. A terrifyingly powerful version of overly attached girlfriend. One shudders. And back to him. The only data I have is knowledge of how Nadalia responds to her darling, you, snuffing her. She's the sort who'd present you with the head of your mistress, smiling, relieved. But it's okay, see? Now we can be together forever. Why are you so sad? She could never love you the way I do. And to this I could only say, Ghibli Ghibli. And back to him. Yeah. This is fascinating. Also, it brings fascinating light to Shanalot's name for you. Bearer of the Curse. She doesn't mean a bearer, one more person with it. She from the beginning calls you Bearer of the Curse, the one who bears the weight of the true curse. Not the undead curse, but want. Her daddy understood that the true curse was want. Surely his little girl does too. And when she addresses you that way, she's basically acknowledging that you're her monarch, and she knows it. That you're the one who will take the throne, or reject it, but it will be offered to you. She knows it. I am totally mind-blown that Vendrick knew. He chose you, and set it up for you to unlock. And his giving you the secret of never hollowing is the clearest, most overt sign there. You realize that he had it all along, and wouldn't take it. It also means that Aldia was wrong. Oh my god, Vendrick knew all along that Aldia was wrong. He knew how to burn forever and never extinguish. He knew exactly what it took to be an immortal human. And kept that from Aldia, obviously, because what do you think Aldia would have done with that knowledge? He kept the secret from Nishandra and Aldia. He solved the equation but wouldn't become the Eternal Man. And I pointed out, folks have been saying he made remarkable findings on and peered into the true essence of the soul. And Justin took a moment there to look at the dialogue from later visits with the Crowns and said, oh, he didn't take it because he largely agrees with Aldia. Whoa. And I asked, in the sense of this cycle sucks, couldn't there be something better? And he went on, that he sees fire ending as inevitable, and this is why he didn't take the throne. He does, however, believe in you. Look at his last words to you.
One day fire will fade, and dark will become a curse. Men will be free from death, left to wander eternally. Dark will again be ours, and in our true shape, we can bury the false legends of yore. Only, is this our only choice? Seeker of fire, coveter of the throne. Seek strength. The rest will follow.
and with that he grants you immunity to hollowing. And I said, it reminds me a little of Aldia's "there is no path" ending speech. He doesn't know what's ahead, but he figures if anyone's gonna figure this shit out, you're it. And back to Mr. JC, the brothers agreed more than they disagreed. Aldia sought the answer in trying to bring back the ancient dragons who existed outside of the cycle. Vendrick sought to become the monarch capable and willing to burn forever, and he knew that monarchs could be corrupted. He was. The ones he sends you to slay were. You are not going to sit on the throne forever. Simple law of soul thermodynamics. You burn. You don't hollow, but you burn. That which burns scatters to the four winds. Another will collect what burned away from you, will arrive at the kiln, and attempt to take it from you one day. It's always gone this way. You may be immortal, but you can be cut down, and your crown taken from you. And he wants you to know this, know what you're inheriting, and then yes, he's chosen you as the true king. He will let you have the throne, he just wants you to absolutely understand what it is you're inheriting. The brighter you burn, the darker the shadows your flame will cast. A Nashandra will come for you one day. Usurpers will come for you. Time will weaken you. You will wish with all your might to be finite, and you won't be. And I put in, and is this our only choice? Suggests that he also entertains Aldia's idea that you'll say, fuck your meaningless decision, and try to find a third option. It's a question. He doesn't know if there's a third option, or that, even if there is, that you'll meet with any success seeking it. But he doesn't know. Could be. And his reply? Yep. How can you call the dark inevitable if ages of dark have come and gone? Think about it. And that line has another possible meaning. The dark is not inevitable if successor kings are cultivated, chosen, and they accept their duty as temporary stewards of the fire. They are this game's Frampt and Koth, really, but both disillusioned by the temporary at best nature of the cycles. You sit on the throne, you burn. The crown, you might note, doesn't protect your soul pile when you die, only prevents hollowing. Think about what that means out of game terms. You remain, and you remain coherent, yourself, intact mentally and physically, but you can indeed still be depleted. Those souls in you that the throne is burning away aren't wearing crowns themselves. You will one day have to regather them from the world, and return them to the throne to burn anew, or let someone else do it. And I said, and it's a separate point, but it also indicates you're still very much undead. You still revive at bonfires, and hollowing comes right back if you take your special hat off. You're not cured, you're on a drug cocktail. And back to him, you're stabilized. You still can't usher in a permanent age of fire. Can't be done. Fire's nature is impermanent. And now Vendrick's decision not to wear the crown he could indeed make becomes more understandable. It wouldn't make fire permanent. Fire isn't permanent. You can be an unbreakable bottle, but you can't be an ever-full one. This is the most amazing, deep, multi-layered, and multifaceted story. The next round in our conversation came just about a week later, and he led off with, I note that Alana is so damned unsatisfying as a villain, partly because you're never fully sure she did anything. And I said, yeah, you have no heads up on her, and not really any wind down either. She just appears, tries to smack you with a giant halberd, and that's the beginning and end of her screen time. Not even any real item lore to speak of. And he replied, though it's been suggested that her few words aren't spoken to you, but rather to/about the city itself, hence why they aren't spoken directly to you, but to the side before attacking you. If we interpret them that way, and I admit it's a short leap, she becomes much more interesting, and the deserving of the Meyer line makes sense. It suggests she brought the poison to Shulva, and if we accept this leap, other things click into place too. If she's the source of the poison, then the slumbering dragon was poisoned by her. Why, you ask? Think about it through the eyes of a wrath elemental. It's not waking up, so it's not feeling anything. In her utter resentment of Sir Jorg and his Drakeblood Knights, stealing the precious essence of her husband's god dragon, she does something that would only make sense to a wrath elemental, poisons the dragon to get back to Jorg. This nudges the story of the 4 mana shards in an interesting direction, too. They were all rather sincere, just weak, and driven by a want. Let us look at the four in this light. Etlana, seeking vengeance against her king's enemies, threw out the baby, dragon, with the bathwater. Nadalia, obsessed with the old Iron King, wouldn't let him or his castle stay dead, resurrecting them as undead to serve her as a lingering extension of him. Creepy how you find her body clutching his crown, sitting on his throne. And to that I added, in what might well be a wedding dress. And he went on, Alsana, the shard of fear and weakness, poisoned her king accidentally, meaning no harm but herself a dark magnet. And then Nashandra, who wanted power more than anything, and mistook love of Vendrick's power for love of Vendrick. And when he punked himself to prevent his power from feeding her, she snapped. It was the cruelest thing he could possibly do in her eyes, deny her the one thing that would have, she was sure of it, made her complete. Revisiting Nashandra as someone who thought she loved Vendrick, in her broken, damaged Manus Fragment way, then believed Vendrick did the cruelest thing possible to her, denied her what she wanted purely because she wanted it, makes her an even deeper and more interesting lady. She turned on him because, in his eyes, he turned on her first. Also, I had a thought about the Dragblood Knights. There are still a fair number of them about, alive and alert and unhallowed and well. And I said, really? The ones you encounter in the Sanctum I figured for hollows, though I never tested that with the old whip or anything. And he pointed out, they conspicuously don't fight like hollows. Fast, focused, not like the Sanctum guards. If they're hollowed, then they're at least recently hollowed, still fresh. I also note that Shulva shows signs of structural damage, but surprisingly little age decay compared to other areas. And their location concentrated near Sin's Nest. I have the following theory. Jorg died pretty recently, all things given. It's ancient to you, maybe, but not in the flashback timeline you keep visiting. The time you encounter in the DLC area is pretty fresh after Jorg lanced Sin and Shulva got the Death Bukake. Also explains why Etlana is still there. She's doing what a good Wrath Elemental does. When aim is lost, redouble effort. This timeline's relationship with past Dranglake is unknown, so the idea that Velstadt was indeed from Shulva is totally plausible. We know Shulva fell into the past long ago from where you stand, but from the looks of Dranglake Castle, so did Dranglake. Velstadt may have left a Shulva still in fine shape, to serve Vendrick. And says I, in other words, when you fight him in the crypt, he may have been hollow for a very long time. Exactly, says the man. I said that is an appealing possibility, because man, I want something to explain why Etlana can summon his likeness, beyond texture swaps are easy. And he offered a theory. These are other great Shulva elite knights. Velstadt in his armor simply looks like him, much in the way two Katarina Onion Bros look alike with armor on. And it utterly makes sense why Shulva's elite knights would guard their queen. Yeah, I was thinking that. Didn't necessarily have to be Velstadt specifically she was summoning, just someone with the same gear. And a few months later, at the beginning of February 2016, the good Mr. Carpenter opened up the last chunk of our Dark Souls 2 lore conversation with, "Oh, and I had some thoughts about Shanalot. She's serving as a firekeeper, as Navon's Ghostwriter points out. Firekeepers are linked to their fires. They go on, burning a share of their soul in it to keep it healthy. What you are, at the end of the game, when you choose the Frampt ending, is basically becoming Firekeeper of the First Flame. And I thought it'd be neat if they made the Farfire in Majula go out if you killed her, the way Firekeeper's bonfires go out in Dark Souls 1, but it doesn't happen." Says he, it would, yes, but let me make an interesting point. The Firekeepers were retired because Shanalot was meant to be a single Firekeeper for all the fires. That's why a world with multiple bonfires burns without active tending. Being human, she had dark in her, want, that which is the fuel for the fire. Being dragon, she was meant to be eternal on her own, undying. She was meant to keep the fires going without the first flame needing its own specific Firekeeper. But as she says, it didn't work. Said I, which could account for why the far fire isn't tied to her life in the classic sense. Nodding in agreement, he went on, she's tied to all of them, but is herself insufficient to tend all of them and feed fuel back to the first flame. It sure explains what she was created for and why she wasn't named. And more, why she's so damned eager for you to link the fire and take the load off her shoulders. And from my side, about why she wasn't named, feel up to expanding on that a bit? She was made to hide away, to be a human battery in essence. Furthermore, that must have been excruciating. If the load of keeping a single fire is so much that one must devote one's whole life to it, imagine her load. She must have been so damned grateful to you for easing it when you sat on that throne. And even if you decide to let it fade, well, still, it's out of her hands now. She did all the guiding and vetting she was supposed to. The new age of dark is on your hands, and she has nothing left to tend. And that, as they say, is that. A lot of ideas there, a lot of interpretations, and even if Dark Souls 3 shot a few of them down and left many others unaddressed, I found them very interesting to ponder, and I hope you folks out there at Viewerland found them interesting as well. I'd like to say thank you once again to Justin Carpenter for the game, for his insights, and for granting me permission to include said insights in this here video. And with that, the time has finally come to close the door on Dark Souls 2, at least with respect to this channel. Well then, I'll try to get something new rolling very soon, and I hope to see you then. Until next time, I remain and may the flames guide thee.